Thank you. Thank you for coming. Welcome, everyone. Again, my name is Kristine. This is How to Teach Agile to Anyone and Have Fun Doing It. And I actually gave this presentation in the spring at Agile, so hopefully you haven't already seen this. If you have, go ahead and leave. I won't be offended right now. That'll be fine. I work for IBM. I'm in IBM Systems, and that's the part of IBM where we have around 20,000 people, and we work on mainframes. Okay, good, yes. We work on mainframes and storage and server devices, hardware and software. I'm part of a very small team of transformation leaders, and what that means, there's about 4 of us for that whole organization, and we serve as educators and tool enablement and coaches for those development teams on both Agile and DevOps and design thinking. So let's go ahead and get started. This is a picture of my niece. Her name is Summer, and this was taken a few years ago. She's about 9 years old, and I took her and her younger sister out to do some horseback riding while they were visiting me in Raleigh. And her younger sister's about 7, and she got on her horse, and we gave her the instructions how you ride a horse, and she was kind of scared once she got all the way up there. And so I ended up taking the reins, and I walked the horse for her, and I steered the horse, and I stopped the horse, and I made sure that she didn't fall off. And then Summer got on the horse. Summer is kind of like me, and she got on her horse, and I gave her the instructions, and just as soon as I finished, she took the reins and said, I got this, Aunt Kristine, good. And so she did. She took the horse, and she did all of the stopping and turning and stayed on, and she did a great job. Well, later that night, we were on Skype with their mom, and they talked to their mom about how they're so proud that they learned. And I didn't say anything at the time, but really only one of them learned how to ride a horse. The other one learned how to sit on a horse, right? And that's kind of what we do as Agile educators. We look at the difference between receiving information and actually learning how to do something, learning a new behavior. And that's what I'm going to talk to you all about today, is that difference between receiving information and truly absorbing it as learning. So this presentation is based on several different things. One is the theory and science behind adult learning. One is my real world experiences. Come on, we got seats up here. My real world experiences as an educator, workshop facilitator, Agile coach. I actually spent 8 years doing e-learning development, studying adult learning theory. And I'm going to introduce some really fun activities along the way, so you're not going to sit still for this entire hour. We're going to do a few fun activities. Here we go. If we want to effectively educate our colleagues, our clients, our peers, our leaders, we need to keep in mind at least 3 things. First, we need to treat them like they're children. We need to treat them like students, and we need to treat them like adults. And I'll talk about each one. So treat them like children. If you're paying attention to me, I've got you for another about 5 minutes before you start to drift off, at least according to the latest science on human attention. College students can't go more than 10 minutes without daydreaming during a lecture. Surprised by that, right? The quote in the middle is from Microsoft CEO, the true scarce commodity in our world today is human attention. And the third here is a study that was done that showed that the average attention span of an adult is 8 seconds. And by the way, the average attention span of a goldfish is longer than that, 9 seconds. So that's where we are. So how can we capture and maintain attention of the people that we're trying to educate? You're in this room today because you're probably trying to teach Agile to someone, whether that's your team, whether it's 5 people, whether it's 5,000 people. So how do we maintain that kind of attention? Well, first, just like children, adults need to take breaks. And typically when I'm giving a workshop, maybe it's a 2-3 day workshop, I insist that we have breaks roughly every 90 minutes or so, just to make sure that people are feeling refreshed and engaged in the workshop. Definitely keep them fed and caffeinated. Being hangry is a real thing, and you need to make sure that you have snacks and caffeine for them. This picture is a real picture of one of the last workshops I did. I always do a retrospective at the end of the day. and ask them what went well, what didn't go well, what can we improve. And 3 of the 6 comments were about the snacks that we had that afternoon. So it can also help you to get some positive feedback. Also, adults learn very differently than children, and adults have different learning styles. So psychologists tell us that a lot of people learn by listening. Some learn visually. Some learn through collaboration. Some people learn through discussion. So there's a lot of different ways that people learn. And in order to accommodate that, you want to try to vary your methods and your media. So often, again, I have lectures in my workshops, but I often incorporate things like YouTube videos and activities and discussion to help to keep people's attention up. The other thing is to limit your lecture time. There's a reason why TED Talks are 18 minutes long. That's as long as you're going to keep somebody's attention, really. So try to limit your lecture time as much as possible. Stretch it to 30 minutes if you think you can get there, but you'll start to lose people after that. Just like children, adults love a good story. And what better way to do it than to tell a good story? So many of us remember where we might have been on 9/11, or where we, the details of when our child was born, but we can't remember what we had for breakfast yesterday morning. Yeah. And that's because human memory is tied to emotion. So you're more likely to remember something if you have strong emotions tied to that memory. And what better way to evoke emotion than through storytelling? So information conveyed in that storytelling format is 6 to 7 times more memorable than telling something in facts alone. So the next time you think about portraying some information, let's say that you have a chart and you want to talk about this team who went from delivering every 18 months to delivering every 6 weeks. That's good. That's a good fact to share, but wouldn't it be more meaningful and more powerful if you share that as a story? And make it a good story. Make it a story with a protagonist and a beginning and a middle and an end and some tension and some conflict and a happy ending, right? Not only will your participants be entertained, but it's more likely to be remembered by them. And third, just like children, adults love to play games. So studies have shown that educational games actually increase the level of knowledge retention and test scores for adults compared to other types of learning. So the University of Colorado actually did a study that showed that there's a 9% increase in retention and a 14% increase in test scores for game-based e-learning compared to e-learning alone. So try to incorporate these games into your classes and your workshops whenever you can. Not only are your participants going to have fun, but they're going to learn something. One of the resources that I have as a go-to resource is tastycupcakes.org. If you haven't checked that out, they have some really good Agile-based educational games that can inspire you. This is one example. We call it our Happy Face game. Anybody heard of this, the Happy Face activity? Okay. It's a really good game to play with teams that you're trying to teach who have an operational Agile pattern. So this teaches them about Kanban boards. It teaches them about workflow, WIP limits, efficiency, and you get the bonus of having adults play with, construction paper, glue sticks, and rounded scissors. So how can you go wrong there, right? But it's a really great exercise that we've tried. So again, if we want to effectively teach adults about Agile, we need to treat them like children. Remember, we have to give them breaks, both mental and physical. Incorporate storytelling whenever you can, because it will be more memorable for your participants. And play games with them, because increased retention comes from playing educational games. So let's stop talking about games and play one. So this is a game that I like to play with teams that are fairly new to Agile, or teams that need a refresher on what our Agile values are as a company at IBM. So we're going to play this game too. The first thing I need everybody to do is divide up into equal teams. So how about we do like teams of 5? Just find 4 people near you, and you're a team. You can sit, you can stand, it doesn't matter. Everybody have a team of 5. 5. Who needs one more? You need one more here? Anybody else need one more? You need one more? No, 5. 5. Keep it fair. We got 1. 81. 81. Anybody else? You need 1. All right. Can one of you move to that team, and maybe you could get on the team?
Sure. Yeah.
And I don't think I should get on the team. That would be cheating. We have one team that's one down. That's okay. That's all right. We're close. All right. So here's what you're gonna do. I need you to find a pen or a pencil among the 5 of you. Just pick a pen or a pencil. We have one. Okay. All right. So here are the rules of the game. The rules of the game are everybody has to touch the pen, everybody in your group, and when they touch that pen, they must say their name. These simple rules. Everybody has to touch that pen or pencil, and when they do, they have to say their name. Okay? So I'm going to time you. We're going to do this probably 3 times. Okay? So ready and go. Done? 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 We're done. Okay. So that's pretty good. We had between 2 seconds and maybe 8 seconds. That's pretty good time. All right, we're going to try it again. When your team finishes, I want you to all raise your hand. Okay, ready and go. That was a lot faster. We had some that were 4 seconds, some that were. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds as a team to talk about how you can get better for the next iteration. Go. Okay, ready, stop. All right, I'm going to time you. Ready and start. Are you coming? Okay, so what did you learn? What did you learn? We were faster.
Learn by doing.
Faster when we work together. Learn by doing. Faster when you did a retrospective. So you got better, got a lot faster after you were able to get together as a team and talk about that. Okay? Did you get faster over time, over your different iterations? You got better and better? No. Who told you what to do? Okay. No one, right? You all contributed. You were kind of a self-directed team. Yeah, there wasn't one person coming in and telling you what to do. So I like to use this activity when I work with teams, again, to try to emphasize our 3 Agile principles at IBM, which are clarity of outcomes, listen, learn, iterate, course correct, and self-directed teams. You can see how that activity reinforces the ideas behind that, more than a lecture would, for example. Okay, my second point here is when we're trying to teach Agile to adults, we need to treat them like students. Specifically, we need to treat them like student drivers. Do any of you remember what it was like when you first learned how to drive a car? you might have seen someone else drive for a lot of your life. You might have read a driver's manual. You might have taken a class. But none of us really, truly learned how to drive a car until we got behind the wheel. And that's basically how adults learn best. We learn by doing. And people have studied this for decades and shown that this is our retention of learning pyramid. So we retain, as adult learners, less than 20% of what we receive in one-way formats like this. We retain up to 75% of what we hear through exercises, discussion, games, demonstrations, and play. And we really retain the most when we learn by doing. Over 75% of the information is retained when we learn by doing. And to do that, that is something like working with a coach, being able to immediately apply what you've learned. So let your students or your adults get behind the wheel when you're doing a workshop. Reinforce that learning with them immediately after you introduce your concepts. So what I do for our workshops is use some examples here of a wall of work. So we introduce the idea of a wall of work, but then I ask them to immediately try it on their own. Maybe they need a personal wall of work. Maybe it's a wall of work for them. Maybe it's a wall of work for their workshop. Retrospectives, again, I do a retrospective at the end of each day during my workshops. I put a big whiteboard on the door and say what worked well, what didn't work well, what questions do you still have, what ideas do you have. That's a retrospective. You learned about it, you just did it. Team teach is another technique that I use where I divide up the room into small teams, and instead of introducing concepts to them, I ask them to teach the rest of the room. So I might have teams of 5 or 6 people, and I'll give each of them a concept and ask them to research it and to teach the rest of the team about that concept. Because one of the best ways you can learn something is teach it to somebody else. The other point I'll make here is that this approach of immediately applying what you learn really helps when you have some skeptics in the room. How many people have dealt with skeptics in the room? Everyone, right? So, these are people that are like, yeah, that's nice, but it's not good. So I like to frame this as an experiment, right? And when we talk to people about just try it yourself, it's an experiment, it really helps them to think about it in a different way and to try it. Just try it as an experiment instead of saying that it's some sort of a mandate. The other one I almost skipped is the watch me, guide me, let me approach. So when I was doing e-learning as an instructional designer, this is one of the approaches that worked really well for us. And it's an approach you might want to try as a coach. The idea here is that when you're trying to teach someone how to do a behavior or a task, watch me means you watch me do it first, and then guide me is we provide assistance to them as they try it, and then let me means they do it on their own. Kind of stand back in the back of the room and are there. It's a great approach if you're trying to, for example, coach a team over time. Let's say maybe you're trying to teach them how to do a retrospective. The first time, you might kind of do it for them, at least the facilitation part of it. The second time, you're going to guide them through it. System is needed. The third time, you're sitting in the back of the room and letting them do it. Right? So watch me, guide me, let me approach. But what do you do if you're trying to teach somebody something that's a little more complex than this? Like sprint planning or story point estimation, that's when simulations come in. So just like they might have a flight simulator for a pilot, we have Agile simulators for Agile practice. One of the things that has worked really well here is our Marvin. Does anybody remember Marvin? Yeah. So I'm not dating myself too much. So Marvin and the Space Modulator. So we have a fictional activity. It takes our teams in a workshop about 4 hours, about an afternoon to do it. And what we do is we have this backstory that we tell the team. So it's Marvin the Martian. IBM has decided that we're going to get into the Martian tourist segment market. We're going to be the first ones in. And our persona is Marvin the Martian, and marketing has determined that they would really like to have tours of Earth. And one of the things we need to do before we can launch this part of our business is we need to create a brochure to help the Martians understand these tours of Earth and what they're going to get out of those tours. And so their job as teams, and it's usually squads that are taking this training. Their job as a squad is to create a brochure for these Martian tours of Earth. And they need to do it in 2 iterations. Okay? So that's the backstory we give them. We make sure that each team has a role assigned for a product owner and a scrum master, testers, and developers. We also have somebody from marketing and an executive in the room. So they learn how to prioritize a backlog, how to write a user story, how to write acceptance criteria. They learn about iteration 0. They learn how to go through stand-ups, retrospectives, showcases. They learn how to have a wall of work and use it as a team. We have a huge showcase at the end, and that's a picture of one of those. We tried this initially, got some feedback that said, you know what, we're professionals here. We're not going to play around with Martians and construction paper. Why don't you use a real-life scenario instead of a fictional? And we actually did try to do that, and we found that it was just too much. It was cognitive overload for these teams to try to understand a brand new way of practicing their craft and to apply it to a complex area like what they were working on at the same time. So we went back to doing the fictional scenarios, and we feel like those have worked really well because the teams learn how to apply these practices in a fictional scenario before they then take it back to their team. They learn the practices first, and then they do it in context. Just because it's a fictional scenario does not mean we don't throw in some real-world stuff. So one of the things that we do is during one of the sprints, we come in, and the sprints, they're like 15 minutes long. So we have somebody from marketing come in and say, hey, all the product owners, come here. I got to tell you something really important. All the product owners from all the squads come over in the corner, and the marketing person goes, you know what, we just found out that Martians find it offensive when Earthlings use green, because Martians think that's their color. So everything you got on your brochure that you're creating that's green, gotta go. So what happens, right? The product owners go back to their teams, and some of the product owners go, we have to make this change. Squeeze it in, make it work. Other product owners go back to the teams and go, hey, we really need to do this. What falls out? What can we not do if we have to make these changes? How big of a change are we talking about? So does that happen in real life? Yes. Those conversations really happen in real life, except it's not about a Martian brochure. The other thing that we throw in here, usually near the end when the teams are the most stressed, is we come in and somebody has a label that says VIP executive. And they come over to one of the teams, not the scrum master, they come over to one of the teams, tap them on the shoulder and say, hey, I'm a really important executive and I need a status report, one-page status report of what you're doing right now. And the person on the team either says, okay, and they do it really quickly, or they say, you know what, you need to talk to my CEO, you need to talk to my CEO. Or they take that executive and go, you know what, I know you need a status report. Here's our wall of work. This is exactly what we're doing and exactly who's doing it and where we are. Is that what you're looking for? Yeah, that is what I'm looking for, right? Does that happen in real life? Yes. So we like to throw in some of those real life complications and then talk about them afterwards with the teams. How did that work? Why did that work? Can you do it like this in the real world? Right? So that was really good education for them. The other thing I'll mention is you want to make this fun. So that's why we chose this scenario. And there's nothing more fun than watching grown men argue about Martian to Earthling currency and, the best feline-free areas of the Earth. Martians don't like planets, don't like felines. So go ahead and have fun with it while you're at it. So again, if you want to effectively teach adults about Agile, we need to treat them like student drivers. We need to introduce a concept and then have them apply it immediately so that it's learned and retained. We want to use something like the watch me, guide me, let me approach to help them learn something over time. And we want to introduce these fictional scenarios if we have complex practices that we want the team to learn. Okay. Now we're going to do some learning by doing. So we're going to do another activity. This time you don't need to get up. You just need a pen or a pencil and a piece of paper. So does everybody have something they can write on? Right. You got extra paper there?
You're prepared.
Okay. Everybody got paper, pencil? You're also going to need something you can time yourself with. Either a watch, some of our phones have a timer, stopwatch. Good, go ahead and get that. All right. Don't start yet. Make sure you got the equipment. Okay. When you're ready, Ready? Okay. Here's how you're going to do the activity. You're going to do this twice. First time you do the activity, you're going to write out the word multitasking on one line, and then you're going to write out the numbers 1 through 12 on the second line. You're going to write the word first, you're going to write the numbers 1 through 12, and you're going to time yourself for how long that takes you to do. Okay, so go. When you're finished, let me know. Okay. Now, I want you to do it again, but it's a little different. You're going to time yourself again, but what you're going to do is you're going to write M1, U2, L3 all the way down. So when you're finished, you'll still have 2 lines, one that says multitasking and one that's 1 to 12. But again, you're going to write it one at a time, letter, number, letter, number, letter, number. Does that make sense? All right, time yourself for that. All right, looks like most people are done. Did anybody get faster the second time? How much of a time difference was it? Almost double. Wow, that's great. So I use this activity with teams. You know, I could talk to teams about multitasking and how inefficient it is and how we're going to. They don't believe me. When I have them do this activity and they can see that it takes them twice as much time or 3 times as much time to go from one task to another, this task switching time, it really does hit home that fact that multitasking really does take twice as long. So it's a great activity, a good example of how you apply the learning right after. All right, the last thing I wanted to talk about here was final piece of advice in facilitating. Treat your adult learners like they're adults. So this is Malcolm Gladwell. He's considered one of the fathers of adult learning theory in the United States. His work spanned from around the 50s and 60s all the way to the 80s. And he came up with this radical idea that children and adults learn differently. And that adults, he came up with several adult learning principles that are still applicable and relevant today. And I'll talk about a few of them here. One is about experience. So adults come to the table, come to your learning sessions, unlike children, with their own past experiences. And those experiences might be good, or they might be really bad. And so we have to acknowledge that adults do have those experiences that they're bringing to the table. Adults also require that the learning is relevant and meaningful and to them in their roles. So it's important that we help them understand how it's relevant and how to them. Unlike children, adults are self-motivated. So children might be motivated by teachers, by parents in terms of their learning, but for adults, that motivation is internal and it has to come from within. So keeping these principles in mind will help you to make your learning experience-based and meaningful and motivational for your teams. So first of all, encourage the people in your workshops to share their experiences. I once had a workshop where I was talking with some leaders, and let's just call them traditional leaders. And one of them, let's call him Oscar, was a little grouchy, kept giving me grief during the entire workshop. He kept saying from the very beginning, this Agile stuff isn't working. I talked about the benefits of Agile in the industry, talked about the benefits of Agile to IBM, I gave examples, talked about the benefits of Agile in his own organization, none of it touched it. And then one of the guys sitting across the room raised his hand and said, you know what, this Agile stuff really has worked for my team. Here's an example of how it works. That is when Oscar shut his mouth and started listening to what we had to say. And what that taught me as a facilitator is that it's so much more powerful for somebody to hear something from a peer than it is to hear it from a so-called expert. So encourage the people in your workshops to share their experiences because it might be something that really helps you as a facilitator. Also be sure that you're providing clear outcomes at the beginning of your workshop to help your learners understand why this is important, why we are doing this, what we are going to be going through to, again, help with that internal motivation. The other tip is that teams that work together learn together. So we really try to educate teams instead of saying, there's a PO class, there's a Scrum Master class, there's a leader class. We try to get the teams all together in the classes because they work together and they will take this learning back with them to continue to learn and work together and apply it together. What we often have found that's been successful is we've actually done this where we take the teams through about a 3-day workshop on Agile, and then we take the leaders, the second, third line leaders, through a 2-day workshop, and then on the 5th day, they all get together. And they all talk about how they're going to apply the learning together to that organization. We found that a lot more successful than sort of this broad brush approach of Agile education. Also, because adults are self-motivated, you're going to come across these skeptics. You're going to come across people who think this is a huge waste of time. I often call them prisoners because they don't want to be there in your workshop, but they have to be there for some reason. So what I try to do is this hopes and fears activity. Anybody heard of this? A few of you. So what I do is I basically have 2 big whiteboards in the front of the room at the very beginning of the workshop, and I say, what are your hopes and fears for this workshop? What do you hope to accomplish? What do you hope to get out of this? And what are you afraid of? Like, what are you really concerned about in this workshop? And it helps me as a facilitator to understand where they're coming from, what their motivations are, and it's helped to get elephants out of the room. Sometimes there's an elephant in the room and you know it. Sometimes there's an elephant in the room and you don't know it. I once taught a workshop where it was supposed to be train the trainers kind of class. So we have a program in IBM Systems called the Agile Champions. They're advocates for Agile. And so we're teaching the champions, train the trainers. And I began the class and I did this activity, and I learned through this activity that most of the people in there had been voluntold to be there. Everybody came across this. Their managers are like, you're going to go. You're going to be the Agile champion. And a lot of them didn't even want to be. And so it was really great for me as a facilitator to learn this at the beginning of the workshop, instead of waiting, 2 or 3 days in to realize that this is something that they really weren't fully bought in on. So hopes and fears is a good activity. Also, when we first rolled out this champions class, we had we sort of ended on a low note at the end of the 3rd day. We had this really energized, wonderful, fun, activity-based 3-day class. Then at the end of the 3rd day, everybody's like, that was fun, but I'm pretty sure our managers really don't. I'm pretty sure our executives really don't mean it. When we go back and try this, they're really not going to like it. And so we tried this experiment where at the end of the next class, that third day, we had what we called a panel discussion, ask me anything session. And we invited 3 executives from the team. So it was like an executive, high-level managers, and a technical manager. We wanted to include a technical leader there as well. And we invited them into the room on the last day and said, ask them anything. Ask them absolutely anything. And of course, we made sure they were Agile enthusiasts before we invited them. And it was great. It was a really great session. Felt comfortable. And even if they didn't feel comfortable, I said, give me your question and I'll ask it, right? We want this to be an open discussion. And it was great. It was a great dialogue. And the teams actually left the workshop feeling very energetic and motivated. And so that was a great way to end on a high note and address those skeptics. Lastly is ELMO. ELMO I love. ELMO stands for Enough, Let's Move On. Enough, Let's Move On. And I actually have an ELMO plush doll that I bring to my workshops. And I don't know about you, but in IBM, they love to talk. IBMers love to get into the weeds, into the details of everything. And so I often have to grab my plush Elmo doll and, hey, Elmo, enough, let's move on, right? Let's get back on track. And I found that it works really well as a gentle, friendly reminder that we need to get the workshop back on track. And in hand with Elmo, we have a parking lot. So adult learners need to be acknowledged. They need to feel like they've been heard. And a great way to do that is to say, you know what, you're bringing up a great point. We don't have time to talk about that right now. Let's put it on the parking lot, and we'll get to it at the end of the day. And we all can do it. Okay. So again, if we want to teach our teams and our leaders and our colleagues about them like they are adults, we need to help foster that internal motivation that they need by explaining to them why they are here and how it can benefit them. We need to acknowledge the fact that they've had past experiences before they walked in the door and encourage them to share those experiences. And we want to make it meaningful and relevant to their jobs, their teams, their organizations. So, our last activity. Studies have shown that adults are more likely to follow through on a commitment if they share it with somebody else. So I often, at the end of my workshops, have people share their personal commitments on it. So our final activity is going to be, I'm going to ask you to pair up with somebody. And I'm going to give you a few minutes to share 1 or 2 things that you've learned so far today. It doesn't have to be in my session. Great if it was. 1 or 2 things that you've learned and how you're going to apply that in some way after you leave this conference, this Agile Day. So let me give you a couple minutes. Find a partner and share. Great, thank you, thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up because I wanted to leave a few minutes for questions. So again, if you are an Agile coach or an educator or even a team member and you want to try to teach anybody about Agile, or you want to try to teach someone how to drive a car, ride a horse, keep these adult learning principles in. Treat them like children, treat them like students or student drivers, and treat them like adults. And when you do, you'll help ensure that they're not only receiving information from you, but that they're truly learning a new behavior or a new task or a new skill in a fun, engaging, and effective way. That's all I have. Thank you. Are there any questions? No questions at all?
I'm assuming this is maybe a chapter or something that you're teaching your coaches to go out and teach, or how, what's?
Yeah, so there's 4 of us.
Okay.
So we're a pretty tight group, but yes, these adult learning principles are something that together we have learned and experimented with and learned through failure in some cases. But yes, this is something that we're helping to roll out to do workshops.
When starting out Agile on different teams, what's the biggest challenge that you see comes up over and over and over again?
When starting?
When transitioning from not quite Agile to something a little closer.
So many of them. I actually gave a talk at the Agile Leadership Network group Tuesday night about something similar, about why Agile isn't working for you. And I talked about some things. So one is what I'll call lipstick Agile. right? Which is people say that they're practicing Agile. We're doing a stand-up, and we're doing a showcase. But in reality, that's not really what they're doing. And you can tell because it doesn't have those Agile principles, values behind it. So the example I gave is, you might be doing a showcase, but you don't invite users to it. It's the same meeting you used to have. You used to call it an approval or sign off, and now it's called showcase, right? So there are things like that which you dig into the practices, you recognize that. One especially, it's pretty common, is Agile managers are not the same thing as Agile leaders. And I have run across some people who call themselves Agile leaders who do not demonstrate Agile leadership behaviors. And I think that is needed as an example for these teams from the top. So I can work all day long with squads and teach them about the practices and the tools. But if they don't have that leadership support and modeling, it's really hard to make traction. And the last thing I talked about was some teams, and this isn't as pervasive at IBM, but some teams believe that Agile is all you need. So if you're doing Agile perfectly, all the practices, tools, DevOps, you're delivering every 11 seconds, bingo, you're making money and you're rich and everybody's happy. That's not necessarily the case, right? Because you might be delivering something crap every 11 seconds that nobody wants to buy or nobody wants to use. And so I talk about how important it is to bring in the perspective of a product manager or an offering manager in terms of understanding the market, and then bringing in design and design thinking to understand the user. Make sure that your products are not only delivered quickly and with high quality, but they're also delivered, it's delighting users and having a great user experience and delivered to the market that you're trying to go after. Those are just some of the things that I've run across.
So I love that you actually model this behavior session as well. So I really appreciate that.
Try to apply what you learn.
So curious to hear your thoughts. There's this notion of 70-20-10. 10% of learning is from chartering with the first 5 days, like you do 3 days teams, 2 days of leadership, and then you can get together. So 70-20-10 people say that 10% can only achieve 10% of that. But then the 70% of it is on the job training. So I want to hear from you. After you do this 5-day session, what's your follow-up with them on the job?
Good question. Good question. So we made the mistake early on of just doing an education session and leaving. Right? You parachute in, you do the education, and you leave. And we found that those teams, when we checked in with them 3 months, 6 months, 9 months later, some of them were doing great, but others just had completely stalled. And so it is important after you do that initial education to follow up with those teams. So we often have checkpoints, at least with the leaders, afterwards to say, hey, what's going well? What do you want to achieve? How can we help you do that? Right? Some of the best, most successful teams that I've seen, they treat their Agile transformation as an Agile project. So they get together a group of people from different disciplines in the organization, and they roll out changes. They might roll out a new org structure that with sprints, and they gather feedback from the teams, and they do it in a very transparent way. So that's the kind of thing that we would help them do after an educational workshop. So that's a very good point.
What's your secret sauce to having, I'm going to call it middle management, buy into this brand new behavior and way of working?
I wish I had a secret sauce. If I did, I'd be making more money than that. Middle management is what we call our permanent. They are the toughest nut to crack in this. And our approach has been top down, bottom up, right? So we come in and we help the teams. We certainly help the teams on the ground, Scrum teams. And then we talk to the leaders, and we have leadership sessions as well. We've already got buy-in and support from executives. That's not an issue for us. But you're right, it's that middle management layer. So we tend to work with them more. And if they've got their teams pushing up in terms of pressure for what they need from their leaders, and they've got their executives pushing down, that kind of helps a great deal. We also make sure that those people, those middle managers, are in that leadership training. And we talk to them about servant leadership, setting their teams up to be successful, how to distribute work in terms of setting up the structures of the tribes and squad and metrics, the leadership behaviors. So that's where we try to talk to them about that in terms of education. But again, ongoing coaching. Really needed, and it's not a quick journey for them because they are afraid. Because they are afraid that they will become irrelevant in an era of self-directed teams. I'm a manager. I've been a manager for 20 years. I've been telling people what to do for 20 years. This Agile thing, self-directed, what am I going to do? I'm going to be out of a job. What am I? So we try to talk to them about the idea of servant leadership, how that's even more important than this dictatorial kind of managerial approach, how it can benefit them and their team. Try to address that fear that they.
I enjoyed listening to Kristine and iterating the good fortune of having great Agile. I think very similar in the challenge about the group thing here at the beginning. And I was wondering, I've iterated several times, sounds like you're doing techniques. I've always wondered, with teaching design thinking, that's done in a much more immersive way, but I think the practices are a lot easier to grasp. But that's done in a very immersive way, very experiential. So I was wondering, curiosity myself, if I wanted to try this. Have you ever just thrown the team into it? They walk in the room, they're an Agile team, say you pick Scrum, you give them, the artificial challenge, not a real business challenge, but you don't even set up a lot, and they're in there. You come in and sort of coach them through, but it's very, right from the get-go. Have you tried something that drastic, I'd say, and then see how they would do, and what do you think of it?
I like that idea. Some people refer to that as teaching from the back of the room. I think there was a book written about that. And the idea is that you throw people in first, and they recognize how much they don't know, and then they're more ready to learn once they figure that out. And I've wanted to try that, and I've been outvoted so far. I think it's something we might try. It's just that the teams we're working with, we have been starting at pretty close to zero with them. And so if we had them walk into a room and we said, go do a sprint plan, they'd be like, you're in the headlights. But I would like to try it, especially with something different, something not quite as complex.
Or where the stakes probably aren't.
Right. But with design thinking, we do that. So they come into the room and we have a 10-minute introduction, and then we say, go, do this activity, do that activity, and then coaches walk around the room. So, yeah, it has been easier with design.
I did this with lean experimentation on the street and said to customers.
Okay.
I had a group of people look at me like they wanted to kill me. They turned white. They're like, you can't do this. But I will tell you, at the end of the program, I said that was the most memorable. And there's something about that go off to defense.
Yes.
That comes later.
Yes. And one thing I'll just mention really quickly that I tried it this week. I had to do a remote session, and of course you can't see the faces or anything like that. And I did this thing where I gave them the test first. So usually you give them the information and then you test their knowledge. I tested them first. And I think it worked really well because it helped them to understand what they don't know, and they paid attention a lot more because a lot of them got the answers wrong, and they were like, oh, maybe I don't know this other stuff. And so that worked really well.
So your original question a while back, I participated in Scrum instruction, and the instructor did something interesting, which was that he had fairly high expectations pre-reading for the participants before the class, and most of them actually complied. And what it allowed them to do is actually to spend more of the quote-unquote lecture time not covering the fundamentals, but more kind of riffing on more elaborated, commentary, because everybody in the room had a lot of experience, even on Scrum, but very experienced. And then he quickly did get to hands-on practice. So
Like
it's sort of,
we call flip class.
yes, exactly. So he wasn't quite what you're getting to, but it was at least approaching.
I know that RHAD started selling this thing called Lab Enablement, where they totally immerse you fully immerse them in like a room, everything. They go through all of it for 8 weeks. It's called the residency, and people love it. Like the customer really loves it and it seems to be working. So I would say go for it. Like you have the option to like really immerse people in it and give that time to devotion. We all know how hard that is. I think it would be really awesome to try. I think it would work.
Yeah, great.
I love the Martian idea. Is that something you can share with us? That's in or is that
Probably.
IBM specific?
I honestly don't know because I didn't even come up with it. Somebody else at IBM came up with it.
I've done it before somewhere else.
Yeah.
I don't have it.
Okay.
I've done it before, not at IBM.
Okay. Yeah, the guy I know that gave that idea to me. But yeah, I pass it down. But again, it's pretty simple concept. You just take something that's fictional enough. I mean, it still has to be complex. They still have to give you. They have a physical deliverable at the end of the two sprints, which is the key, right? You want them to work on something physical. And you want it to be a scenario that's absolutely fictional so that they don't get into the weeds of the technology, but it's real enough that you have, what we call hills. So we have user-centered outcomes that we introduced at the beginning. We have epics that we give to them, and they have to break down those epics into user stories. So creating a brochure, we went back and forth for a while trying to figure out what was the right scenario for these teams. So yeah, remind me, and I can share that with you.
I feel like you have to kind of take the skeptics on the team and rein them in sooner rather than later because skepticism can spread like a virus.
Oh yeah.
So can you just elaborate a little bit more on how you handle those types of?
Yeah, they're fun. So like I said, I try to do the hopes and fears activity at the beginning to get that out. So adult learners really need to feel heard. So I try to make sure that the skeptics in the room feel like they've been heard. So I give them the opportunity in the hopes and fears to tell us what their concerns are. We try to address those concerns. A lot of them are really, full concerns, right? And so we do try to address those as much as we can. Again, I always encourage other people to share their experiences. So what often happens is if there's a skeptic in the back of the room who's always saying, no, this won't work, I invite the rest of the class to respond. Not for a long time, but enough to give them, a stage for a few minutes. And it's been rare, but there was one time in one workshop where there was someone who just would not stop. And so we had to pull that person aside during the break and say, you know what, why are you here? Sounds like you're not really getting anything out of this. But that was only one person out of 100, right? Most of them, they just want to feel heard. And, this, again, is not a mandate. I'm not coming in telling them what to do. I'm telling them what the benefits have been for other teams and asking them to experiment. Right? That way it doesn't soften up a little bit. And then during breaks, I try to pull them aside one-on-one. Get to know them as a person because then they're less likely to feel like they're being attacked.
How do you do assessment? How do you measure? Did you do that or like I'm thinking rubrics? Mm-hmm. You use any? Have they taken in what you taught them?
We honestly don't. We thought about that. We measure our effectiveness in terms of we do an NPS score and Net Promoter Score for our workshop to survey how we did. But we haven't gone back and sort of tested them or asked them, hey, have you applied what we taught you? We could. I think our way of measuring success is to go to the leadership team and ask, how are your teams doing? Are they still struggling? Are they resistant? And that's kind of a qualitative feel for how well things are going.
Whether you're proficient.
Right. The other thing at IBM is we have a program called our badging program. Are you guys familiar with badges? We have Agile champion badges. We have design thinking badges. So those are a way of measuring proficiency as well. And we do measure how many badges. Yes, it's gamification of it.
But when you're done, are there coaches that stay in place and?
We're it. There's 4 people for 20,000 people. So, we're it. So we are the ones following up with those leaders
What's your frequency of training?
We did a lot more last year. So our approach has been, when we first rolled out the training, it was we're starting at ground zero. So we did broad brush training, Agile 101, for as many people as we could get. And then after we did that broad brush, we focused on our champions. We focused on training the trainers. And then after that wave, we had a few leaders come to us and say, hey, I want my entire organization to do this. And so we worked with those leaders to teach their teams and the leaders in that organization. And now we've evolved actually in the last few months to this model where we're going to the top leaders saying, what are your most projects you want us to work on? And now we're doing more coaching for specific projects and doing educating on a smaller scale. So it kind of evolved over time, our approach. No. I didn't say that out loud, did I? Yeah, it depends on the day I'm having. If I'm having a bad day, the answer is no, I don't think the leaders are effective. Our transformation. But we're seeing results even in a 4%. Depends on the day you ask. Any other questions? I hope you were able to learn something or two in this workshop. Hope you enjoyed it, and find me on LinkedIn or anywhere else. Thank you.